Sarah Orr's the remind, 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 remind.
Adonai, Adonai, Echad. Baruch Shem Kivod, Shem Kivod, Malach. בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך, ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
2:16.
ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל, ואמרת עליהם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף בטיל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, וריתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Emet, it is true. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, O God? Page 218.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושי פלא. שיר החדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך, שפת הים יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל קומה בעזרת ישראל, גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני
Baruch Shmo.
גאווי
2:22.
אדוני שפתי תפתח, ידי ופי יגיד תהילתך. לי that I may declare your glory. Lai, 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 Adonai sifatai tiftach. Yai, lai, 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 ufi agida hilatecha. Yai, lai, 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 oh God, please open my lips. That I may declare your glory. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu ve'Elohei imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, קונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. זוכרנו לחיים, מלך חפץ בחיים, וכותבנו בספר החיים, למענך אלוהים החיים. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם פוקד שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מחכה לחיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך? מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה. מי כמוך אב הרחמים, זוכה יצוריו לחיים ברחמים, ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. Kedusha, page 226. נקדש את שמך בעולם, כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, כך כתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני אלוהיך
We continue independently, either using the words on the page through 234 or turning inwardly to the prayers of our hearts. Don't forget those high holiday insertions. When you finished your personal prayer, you can be seated. We come now to Seder Kriyat Torah, our Torah service, which begins on page 236. We'll invite you to rise if you are able.
Ein kamocha ba'Elohim Adonai v'yein k'masecha malchutcha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Adonai Vayhi b'nso Aharon, vayomer Moshe, ki mitzion, tetzei Torah, udvar Adonai b'Yerushalayim, ki mitzion, tetzei Torah, udvar Adonai b'Yerushalayim, ki mitzion, tetzei Torah. Udvar Adonai b'Yerushalayim Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh v'norah Shemo. Gadolul Adonai iti, uneromima shemo yachadav. Lecha Adonai hagedula, hagedula, hatiferet, vehanetzach v'hakod. Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Lecha Adonai hamamlacha, ve'hamitnaseh lechol lerosh.
Where did it go? You can be seated. There it is. Our Torah portion this morning is Parshat Vayelech. It is the shortest Torah portion in the entire Torah, encompassing one chapter that is 30 verses of text. Normally, Vayelech is one of those double parshiot, so it gets doubled up with Nitzavim. Now, you might be asking yourself, what are these double parshiot that we have in the Torah? It just so happens that we happen to have an unusual calendrical system. As you know, our calendar in the Jewish year goes by lunar months, which means that at the end of a lunar year, you have a problem because it doesn't match up with the solar year. And every single year you do that, the calendar gets pushed back just a little bit. That's why this year Rosh Hashanah started on September 7th, and next year it starts October. And the reason is that this year we are going to have a second month of Adar, a leap month, if you will. Now, the way that the Torah cycles calibrate and adjust for these lunar months, or this lunar month that's get added in, is that on every year where you do not have a month of, or a second month of Adar, you have double parshiot. So there are 7 double parshas in the Torah. Let's see if we can name them all. I think I could do probably 5 or 6. We have Vayelech Nitzavim, or Nitzavim Vayelech. Who's got another one? Acharei Mot Kedoshim, that's 2. Tazria Mitzorah. Maseh Matot, there's 4. Vayakel Pukudei, that's 5. Who's got another one? I don't even remember the other 2. I'm sure if I go back in my head, I could think of it. You get the idea, though. Because we have this longer Jewish year with the extra leap month, again, Vayelech is its own parsha. What's going on in Vayelech? It's at the very end of Moses' speaking. Moses goes out, speaks to the Israelites, and is setting up his final piece of advice to them. He's setting up Parshat Ha'azinu, which is next week's parsha. His, let's call it Shirat Moshe, which is often called the Song of Moses, a long piece of biblical poetry, which Bernie is going to tell you next week. The Hebrew is quite impossible because it's kind of like reading Walt Whitman and trying to understand what Whitman is saying, or actually more like Chaucer. Or, yeah, Chaucer's probably a pretty good example. So what goes on in this week's Parsha? More about going to the land that God has sworn to you, more about you're going to sin and God's going to bring you back. A little bit of what we have already had on repetition. It's not the most exciting Parsha in the world, but nonetheless, we read it, and we are at that point in the calendar. For our Torah reader this morning, it's another anniversary. We are celebrating the 1-year anniversary of Shane becoming Bar Mitzvah. So Shane, we're going to invite you up as our Torah reader. Let me ask the question, is there someone who has not gotten an aliyah in a while who would like an aliyah? And that question goes to our virtual community as well.
This is actually your first time chanting Torah from the Bima, right? Yeah. Because last time we were at your place.
That's right. Anyone want an aliyah to the Torah who's joining us virtually? Do I see any hands?
Shane.
The first in the maftir, the whole thing is 30 verses.
Well, you're doing the other 25.
Okay. Any aliyot to the Torah? I don't see anybody. Any hands raised?
Kathy Yohe has her hand up.
Oh, Kathy, would you be our first aliyah to the Torah? If you're following along in the Blue Torah commentaries, we are beginning. Cantor, what page?
We're beginning on page 1387.
And if you are joining us virtually and want a link to that, it's again Deuteronomy chapter 31. If you go to jcoh.org/live and click on Torah readings, you will be able to find it there. One more time, the page number, Cantor?
Page 1387.
Got it.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Amen.
Amen. Hold on one second. Start one more time. Sorry about that.
Amen. Vayelech Moshe vayidaber et hadavarim ha'elech el kol Yisrael vayomer aleichem ben me'ah va'esrim shana anohi hayom lo uchod latzed v'lavo v'Adonai amar elai et ha'avor et hayarden hazeh Adonai Elohecha hu over lefanecha hu yashmid et hagoyim ha'eleh milfanecha virishtam Yehoshua hu over lefanecha ka'asher diber Adonai.
Amen.
Amen. Second aliyah to the Torah. Oh, you're doing the maftir as well?
Maftir as well. Yeah, so you're doing this. You can just.
Yeah, grab a seat right over there. Let me just find the spot. Va'asa. Do we have a aliyah to the Torah? You want to call someone while I find the spot?
David, would you like an aliyah? You can come up together if you want to, Rana. I don't want to start a family feud here. Oh, well, we're looking forward to it then. You're going to go all the way over there to the podium? Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Adonai noten ha'torah.
Amen.
Amen. V'asa Adonai lehem ka'asher asa lesichon ule'og malkei ha'emori. And God will do to you just as God did to Sichon and Og, the kings of the Amorites. Ula artzam asher hashmid otam. V'natitam Adonai lifnechem. God is going to destroy them, and He is going to give before you. Va'asitem lehem kechol hamitzvah asher tziviti etchem. And He is going to place before you the mitzvah, that which God is commanding to you, that is to wipe them away. Chizku ve'imtzu al tira'u. Be strong and courageous, all of you, and do not be afraid. Ve'al ta'artzu mipnechem, ki Adonai Elohecha hu ha'holech imcha. And do not tremble before them, because Adonai, your God, will go before you. Lo yipared ve'lo ya'azvecha. You shall not sink, and you shall not be abandoned. Vayikra Moshe Yehoshua ve'yomer elav le'enei kol Yisrael chazak ve'amatz. Moses called to Yehoshua and said to him in front of all of the Israelites, be strong and courageous. Ki ata tav'o et ha'am hazeh el ha'aretz asher nishba Adonai la'Avraham letet lehem. For you are going to bring this people to the land that God has sworn to your forefathers to give to them. Ve'ata tanchilena otam ve'Adonai hu ha'holech lifanecha. You're going to lead them, and God is going to go before you. Hu Adonai imcha. Hu Adonai imcha. What's that?
Hu yehiyeh.
Hu yehiyeh imach. He will be with you. Lo yiparech ve'lo ya'azvecha. God will not let you sink, and God will not abandon you. Lo tir'a ve'lo tachat. You shall not fear, nor shall you tremble. Vayik tov Moshe et Torah hazot. Moses wrote down this particular Torah. Vayitena el ha-kohanim b'nei Levi, and gave it to the Kohanes, the sons of Levi. Ha-nosim et Aharon brit Adonai, the ones who lifted up the ark of the covenant. Ve'el kol ziknei Yisrael, and also to all the elders of Israel.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. And we call back up our Torah reader, our Chazan Shane, who will be reading now the Maftir, the concluding verses of this parsha. Begins Hakehilu Elai. It is verse 28, chapter 31. We call on this Shabbat to represent all those who will be rising to say Mourner's Kaddish. Marty Gershon.
You have to give me a second to
Just
find this.
give him a moment to find his place.
It should be around here.
You see it, Shane?
Shira Hazov. It's a little before that. This is a tough one to find.
Oh, man.
Help me, Cantor. Hold on, let me see what I can do here. Oh, maybe it's actually at the very end. I didn't realize it was.
To Mom, so.
I think it's actually, hold on. Here it is. Marty, when you're ready.
Starts here, and goes up there.
Baruch Adonai hamvarach le'olam va'ed.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Haki kol ziknei shiftechem v'shotrehem va'adabera ve'oznehem et hadevarim ha'elech ve'ayida ba'am et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz ki yadati acharei moti ki hashchet hashchitun v'sartem min haderech asher tiviti etchem v'karat etchem hara'a be'acharit hayamim ki ta'asu et hara be'oznei Adonai lehachiso b'maaseh yidehem vayidaber Moshe be'oznei kol kecha Yisrael et divrei hashirah hazot ad tumah.
Shakoach.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נותן ותוכנו baruch atah Adonai נותן התורה.
Amen. Good ritual cantor.
By the way, last year it was an octave higher. Just saying. But it's beautifully done. With the Torah still before us, if there are names that you would like to either call out for healing or place in our chat room, we ask you to do so now as we chant the Misha Berach prayer on page 355 in your prayer books. Misha Berach Avoteinu Mikor HaBracha May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen.
With the Torah, actually, let's get the names. My apologies. Susan. To these names, we also add Jake Fine, Pardeep Bansal, Larry Tamino, Yechiel Ben Mendel, and Ephraim Levi Ben Gittel Va'aharon. We'll rise and support. We'll rise as the Torah is lifted and dressed. Return to the Ark, page 256.
V'zot haTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai biyad Moshe. Yisrael, Yisrael ve'oraita hadu. Yisrael, Yisrael ve'oraita hadu. Torah כך טוב נתתי לכם תורתי אל תעזובו עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה בתומכיה מאושה דרכיה דרכנו וכל נתיבותיה שלום השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה חדש חדש ימינו חדש ימינו כקדם.
You can be seated. We have an interesting haftarah this morning. There are several haftarot which we have to read from. I don't know if we're going to read from them all. So we get a little bit of taste of Joel, a little taste of Micah, and a little taste of is it Hosea?
Yeah.
I think we start out with Hosea, who's
do.
got the line, Shuva Yisrael, return, O Israel, giving the namesake to this week's Shabbat, Shabbat Shuva. If you want to follow along as the Haftarah is read, you can do so if you're joining us virtually by going to jcoh.org/live and clicking on Torah readings. If you are joining us in person and have a blue Torah commentary, you can find it on page. Cantor.
1436. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher בחר בנביאים טובים ורצה בדבריהם הנאמרים באמת. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בתורה ובמשה עבדו ובישראל עמו ובנביאי האמת והצדק. שובה ישראל עד אדוני אלוהיך כי כשלת בעווניך. קחו עמכם דברים ושובו אל אדוני אמרו אליו כל תישא עוון וכך טוב ונשלמה פרים שפתנו אשור לא יושיענו על סוס לא נרכב ולא נאמר עוד אלוהינו למעשה ידינו אשר בך ירוחם יתום. I'm going to now go to the Joel section, which is on page 1438. It's Joel chapter 2, verse 15. תיקחו שופר בציון, קדשו צום, קראו עצרה, אספו עם, קדשו קהל, קבצו זקניהם, יספו עוללים ויונקי שדיים יצא חתן מחרדו וחלה מחופתה בין העולם ולמזבח יבכו הכהנים משרתי אדוני ויאמרו חוסה אדוני על עמך ואל תיתן נחלתך לחרפה למשול בם גויים למה יאמרו ואמין איה אלוהים ויקנא אדוני לארצו ויחמול al amo. Then the Eternal showed zeal for this land and compassion for God's people. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzor kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק, על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים, והיום השבת השובה הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך, ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת שובה.
Amen. I'm pretty sure everyone here remembers 20 years ago, 9/11. I'm sure you can remember just about every second of that day, every minute, how the time passed. But I wonder if we can remember more vividly what happened on September 12th. September 12th, the day the impact of September 11 began to set in. We realized that the world was changing ever so quickly around us. Stores that day ran out of American flags. The slogan, "United We Stand," was pasted over every news media and over every wall that had graffiti, it felt like. Our priorities began to shift ever so slightly, or maybe even drastically. I read a story one time about a windowless room in the CIA headquarters that has a slogan on the wall. It says, "Every day is September 12th. Every day is September 12th. Everything came crashing down on September 11th, but on September 12th is the day we began to realize the changes around us. 20 years later, doesn't seem like every day is September 12th anymore. An article in Time magazine recently noted, after the attacks, America suddenly embraced their neighbors' faith in government, but that didn't last long. Confidence in journalism hit a high mark in the aftermath of the attacks, as Americans couldn't turn away from the coverage. That trust, long gone. So too is the sense of bipartisan potential that rang out from the steps of the U.S. Capitol that day in the form of a bipartisan impromptu "God Bless America" sung by the members of Congress, while the Pentagon was burning at the very time across the Potomac. These days, you can't even get lawmakers to agree to a mob, or to agree that a mob that stormed the Capitol on January 6th with the intention of overturning an election was actually a mob and was actually insurrection. A lot has changed. But then again, so much has shifted so gradually that we haven't exactly been so able to identify that something new is here. And I think that's because we don't often see paradigm shifts happening in real time. We often need retrospect to fully understand them. That is, unless the event that's happening or has happened suddenly and unexpectedly upends our lives. That's in September 11th. That's a pandemic, if you will. Of course, it happened too with the leadership, I think, in this week's Parsha, when Moses passes the helm to Joshua and Parshat Vayelech. Here's what the first line reads. Vayelech Moshe v'yidaber et hadavarim ha'ele el kol Yisrael. Moses went and spoke all of these things to Israel. Something weird's going on, and I'll tell you what it is. We would expect it to say, Vayidaber Moshe et hadavarim ha'ele el kol Yisrael. Moses spoke these words to the Israelites. Instead, you get this word which generally is not in any other part of the dialogue, which is Vayelech. Moses went. Why is this word Vayelech here. The word derives from the root he lamed chaf, which means to go, just like the word halacha, which is Jewish law, but really it means the way that you go about doing things. The way that you go about doing things. Because what was happening is the way that the Israelites were going about and doing leadership and the way that they were about to go do everything was about to change radically. Think of the paradigm shift for a second that's about to happen. The Israelites are sitting on the Jordan River. They're about to get a brand new leader. They're about to be in a brand new land. They're about to have a number of mitzvot that they have to now do in the land of Israel that they've never done before, because there's a good number of mitzvot that are only applicable in the land of Israel. Paradigm shift happening ever so drastically. Vayikra Moshe leHoshua v'amar elav le'enei kol Yisrael. Joshua is called by Moses in front of all the Israelites, and here's what Moses says: Chazak v'amatz. Chazak v'amatz. Strength and courage. And then he continues, Lo tir'a ve'lo tachat. Do not fear and do not be dismayed. Because paradigm shifts are scary. Everything that we know changes. It's not just that the leadership changes. Everything that they know that made sense in the wilderness the last 40 years is about to be different. And we have a choice of whether or not we are to bewail that the present isn't the past, or to try to understand our new reality. With COVID, we witnessed many new paradigm shifts, many new Yavna moments, and I'll explain what a Yavna moment is in just a second. Our Jewish behaviors changed, whether we want to admit it or not. I'm not just talking about streaming or no streaming. Take, for example, Rosh Hashanah services this year. I don't know if you guys noticed it. At the beach, we had the biggest crowd that we've ever seen at the beach for Jewish worship. About 900 people in circles at the beach for Erev Rosh Hashanah, and only a couple hundred on the lawn at the Jewish Center. Normally, it's the reverse. We changed the way that, maybe that was we, maybe it wasn't we, but the way that people behaved as Jews and observed Rosh Hashanah changed drastically. Most of the time, Jews sit at home on Erev Rosh Hashanah and eat dinner and don't go to services, and then come on the day of. That was somehow reversed this year. Now you can bewail the fact that there were so few people on the lawn, or you can identify a profound behavioral change. No one came to Rosh Hashanah in the past, again, because they were eating dinner. Move the venue and the time, and Jewish practice changes. And shifts like this in Jewish behavior have been happening for years, and we only rarely take notice. In the 19th century, very few Jews celebrated Hanukkah. Hanukkah was, let's call it, a minor holiday. Now it's one of the most celebrated Jewish holidays that there are. And it's not just because it's the presents thing for our kids. It's because the holiday, I believe, offers a meaningful story and metaphor for the modern era. You might say Hanukkah is an unimportant Jewish holiday in the Jewish tradition. Look at the Talmud, it gets but a few lines. Then you have holidays that have their own tractates in the Mishnah and the Talmud. Hanukkah, again, just a few lines of text that describes what we're supposed to do. You would say that Shavuot and Sukkot are much more important, and while 1,000 years ago that might have been true, maybe not so much anymore. Very few American Jews celebrate Sukkot or Shavuot. Rabbi B'nai Lappi imagines the Jewish narrative through the lens of which she calls crash theory. Crash theory. Every master story, she says, will ultimately and inevitably crash. Crash, crash, crash. One of three things is going to happen when everything that you know crashes around you. Either you've encountered another master story whose answers you like better, something in the world has happened, some historical event, something out there that makes your master story no longer work for you, or something inside you has changed and you're different, and the old answers from your master story no longer seem true. That's a crash. 9/11, crash. COVID, crash. And we each have these micro crashes that happen in our lives and have to figure out what to do with our narrative, to figure out what to do with what we know about the world and the story that we tell about our lives. So here's option one for the way that people respond to a crash, and that is you deny that it actually took place. You say, no, that didn't happen. You revert to your master story and you cling to it. You take refuge there and hang on for dear life. You're likely to build a wall around that story to make sure no other inconvenient truths get in. Let's call that, for a second, option one. Option one is what happens when a religious person learns that dinosaurs are millions of years old, and then someone comes along and says, and then they actually look at the Torah and say, wait, the world is only 5,772 years old. How can dinosaurs be millions of years old? And when you double down on the narrative, that's when it looks like, God must be testing us and planted dinosaur bones in order to test our faith. That's option one. Deny, double down on your master narrative. Or in a COVID world, we would say the virus is fake, I'm never going to wear a mask, I'm not going to get the vaccine, this is not going to affect my daily life, nothing has changed. My life is the way that it always was. Deny, 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 that's one way that we deal with the crash around us, pretend it doesn't exist. Here's option two. Option two is you accept the crash and you completely reject the master story. You say, yeah, the crash happened and my master story is nothing but a crock. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to live a new story. And the story of the crash, that's your new culture. That's how you're going to understand the world around you. Everything that once was is no longer, and you abandon the past for something that is new. This is the baby with the bathwater option. You're now in a new story. Let's remember that you always live in a story, and it behooves you to know what story you are living in. So what does that look like to adopt a completely brand new master narrative? The world crashes around you and you say, I'm no longer a religious Jew. I no longer believe in God. That narrative doesn't work for me anymore. In fact, after the Holocaust, that was a way that many Jews felt. Their master narrative, the whole idea of God, changed drastically, and God no longer exists. Many people respond to crisis in that particular way. You crash, and you discard everything that you once knew about the past. And here's option three. I'm going to call this one, let's call it the Jewish option. It's to accept that the story has crashed, but instead of abandoning your story, you stay in it, reinterpreting it through the lens of the crash and building a new story from an amalgamation of the original story and the crash material and the reinterpretation. I guess you'd say the most profound example of this, going back to that term I used, a Yavna moment, is the example of the story of Yavna in Jewish history. Let me explain for a second in case you need a little bit of brushing up on history. Back when there was a Jewish rebellion against the Romans, there's the story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, while Jerusalem is under siege, he snuck out in a coffin, and he is then brought before Vespasian, who happens to be the general who is besieging Jerusalem. And when he sees Vespasian, he addresses him as emperor. Vespasian says to him, I'm not an emperor, I'm just the general. And just at that moment, a messenger comes and tells Vespasian that the king in Rome has just died and that Vespasian has been appointed the new emperor. Vespasian says to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he says, look what you've done. You've given me this good blessing, this good fortune. What can I do for you? I will do anything that you ask. And he says, I want you to grant me the ability to form an academy of Jewish learning in Yavna. And so begins Rabbinic Judaism. Everything where Jerusalem was the center of the Jewish world crashes. Temple sacrifice crashes. Sadducean Judaism, done. All of that is out the window, and Judaism becomes reinvented. Essentially, when there's a crash, the Yavna moment is where you say, we realize we're in crisis. Now everything has to get reinvented, rethought of. Torah is still constant. Our tradition is still constant. Our beliefs are still constant. The way that we do everything needs to be redone. We take our story and we adapt it. That is a Yavna moment. 20 years ago, crash. Terrorists crashed planes throughout our country, upending our sense of security. Crash. We lost friends, family, and loved ones. Crash. New York was no longer the same. 19 months ago, crash. The pandemic crashes our daily routines and the way that we live. If there's one thing I know, it's this. We're going to continue to crash over and over again. We're going to continue to witness these paradigm shifts, and when we do, the Jewish way is not to deny cataclysmic events are taking place or to say that our master narrative no longer works. It's to be completely and radically transformed. That's teshuvah, being transformed or transforming. Our goal is to take our story, to take Torah, and to take Judaism, and to fuse it with the new realities around us. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We'll pick up in our prayer books, page 310, and invite you to rise for Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוסף ראשית, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים, ונתן לנו את תורתו, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
You can be seated. Our thoughts now turn to those who are no longer with us, but whose lives still are shining ever brightly in our own lives through the memory that we have for them. As we read the names of members of our community for whom we are in a period of mourning, when you hear the name of a loved one, we'll invite you to rise if you are able so that we can acknowledge you as a mourner. And if there's a name that you don't hear but someone for whom you are still mourning and would like that name read, please rise afterwards and share that name with the community. If you're joining us virtually, we'll ask that you type that name into the chat, and we would be happy to read it. In the period of Shloshim, we remember Nancy Kelly and Paula Landau. In the year of mourning, Andrea Berman, Ernie Frankel, Judy Boris, Rhoda Levy, Allison Hartz-Duke, Deborah Feinberg, Stephen Astor, Albert Cohen, Rosalind Cohen, Sheldon Solo, Gina Faronic, Diane Cohen, Annette Melva Levy, Irving Berman, Moshe David Meisler, Elaine Grossman, Susan Patrikoff, Alexander Gorin, Maxine Greenfield, Maria Purpura, Rita Katz, Alyssa Epstein, John Harrison, Irving Markowitz, Estella Gass, Sharon Epstein, Jared Geldner, Seymour Winnick, Sari Faith Brownstein, Boris Rubenstein, Reuben Cohen, Marilyn Lukashow, Judy Goldstein, Robert Shapiro, Myrna Klein, Florence Leon. It's the yard sites this week of Helene Gabor, Herbert Hillman, Miriam Pickholtz, Beverly Lieberman, Gary Lutnick, Scott Saber. Sol Spielberg, Glenn Winnick, Harold Bring, Jules Gershon, Solomon Lutnick, Carol Rubin, Samuel Sabin, Rose Silber, Ray Cohen, Florence Gleaner, Danian, Beatrice Iden, Marshall Hockhauser, Elizabeth Jaffe, Arnold Zach, Fred Rose, Albert Ziegler, Miriam Asquith, T.R. Bialik, Deidre Preston Collins, Abby Glosserman, Dashiell Swanson, and Neil David Levin. If we missed anyone or if there's anyone you'd like to add, please share those names.
Bill Firestone, Jeffrey Firestone, Jody Arnold, Bradley Arnold, and those members of our congregation who lost loved ones.
To these names, we also add Jacob Kessler, and of course, we're thinking of the over 3,000 names that are too long to list, those who perished in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. We'll rise in support of our mourners. Kaddish is on page 316.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash merabah.
Amen.
בעלמא דברה חילותי וימליך מלכותי, בחיי חון ובימי חון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך
לעולם ולעולמי עמיה.
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה לעילה מן כל ברכתה, בשירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירון בעלמא ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
עושה שלום במרומיו, ויעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen. Zichronam livracha. May their memories forever be a blessing. Be seated. A couple of brief announcements before we conclude. The START Torah study is going to be virtual today. So we're really trying to give our maintenance a little bit of a break. They've been working ever so hard. So please bear with us. We're going to be virtual. High holidays. Next part of them. Part number 2. Coming up on Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock at Main Beach for Kol Nidre, followed by lawn services throughout the day, morning and afternoon. And then Yizkor Ne'ilah is going to be back at the beach. Check our website for the full schedule of events. Tomorrow, Kever Avot service, 1 p.m. at Shalrei Pardes, our cemetery, 306 Old Stone Highway. Am I missing anything?
No, you're not even missing the morning minyan because we'll be deep into Yom Kippur.
That's
on
true.
Thursday.
But in case you didn't take a bag for non-perishable food items to donate to our local food pantries, I think you'll be able to get one on the way out, bring it back to Yom Kippur filled so that we can support the needy within our community. And what are we going to conclude with this morning?
Ein Keloheinu, there is none like our God, page 306. Ein Keloheinu, ein Kadonenu, ein Kimalkeinu, ein Kimoshienu, mi Keloheinu, mi Kadonenu, mi Kimalkeinu, mi Kimoshienu, no del Eloheinu, no del Adonai.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Gemar Chatima Tova.
Those joining us virtually, you could unmute and say hello. We have a screen in the sanctuary, so they'll be able to see you. Sabers, just so you know, Ariel is joining us too. I don't know if you saw that. Good Shabbos, Marvin. How's your